tonight we'll be talking briefly about the Senate budget proposal, which is currently being discussed down in Columbus regarding the ownership and the debt of the Geneva on the Lake Lodge and State Park area. Tonight, you can ask any questions that you'd like through the Q&A feature. That's at the very bottom of your screen. We'll be able to track all those and ask now if you'd like, or ask during the presentation. And Casey and I will answer those. We'll be happy to stay on as long as you're on and answer any questions that folks have. We're also live on Facebook. So if there are any questions for folks watching on Facebook Live, you can comment those and I'll do my best to search those out too. I'll be sharing my screen briefly to go over some financials, but first, would like to invite the County Commissioner, Casey Kozlowski, to share a little bit of background and information to begin.
Sure. Thanks so much, David. Appreciate that. And thank you to everyone that's tuned in here this evening. It certainly is great to have technology such as this to be able to have a conversation and an opportunity to ask questions as it relates to this proposal. So again, my name is Casey Kozlowski. I do serve as one of the Ashtabula County Commissioners and want to talk just briefly about the legislation as it stands today, as I understand it today. And then, of course, David mentioned we'll go over financials and then to the questions, of course. So the concept behind this legislation is simple. The legislation will require the state of Ohio to sit down with the county and enter into an agreement. And the agreement is the document that will serve as, I guess, kind of the final check, I guess you could say, before anything were to occur in a transition from Ashtabula County were to occur with the state of Ohio. But the overarching goal behind the legislation is that it transfers the Geneva State Lodge, which is located at the Geneva State Park, to the state of Ohio. Currently, this is the only lodge in the state of Ohio, and it's very unique in nature in that Ashtabula County, the taxpayers of Ashtabula County did make the decision to move forward with building this facility. And there's no question that it's not likely at that time that there would have been the state entering into an arrangement to build this facility here in Ashtabula County. So no question at that time, the leaders made the decision to build this facility. And for many years, this has served certainly as an economic driver that has benefited Ashtabula County. Now, as it stands today, it's a very successful facility, but we have some debt remaining. Approximately $13 million remains on the original construction debt. There's some additional debt as it relates to some energy improvements that were made to the facility, as well as some funds that the county borrowed to allow for room renovations to occur at the facility. So that brings the total up around a little over $15 million. Now, in 2040, under existing contractual arrangements between the Ohio Department of Natural Resources and Ashtabula County, this asset, the asset being the Geneva Lodge, transfers to the state of Ohio. And it's clear that only occurs after the debt is paid for. So obviously the county taxpayers, individuals in this county have an opportunity to contribute to continue to pay for that facility, and then we pass it off to the state. So the idea behind this legislation and why I, as a commissioner, support a proposal that's going to free up resources here in our county to then allow us to tackle the next economic development project, perhaps here in Ashtabula County. One challenge that I've always had as a commissioner since day one, since I was elected in 2014, is having the ability to have any discretionary funds to be able to work on any number of projects. Now that could be grant matches. That could be a grant match for perhaps a project, an economic development project, an infrastructure project. Perhaps it's another type of endeavor that we're seeking to certainly support, but we always have very limited funds. This is an opportunity for us to continue to have this tremendous facility we have here in our backyard, to continue to be there, and for residents, for visitors and the like to enjoy for years to come. But it's also an opportunity for us to free up resources and now tackle the next opportunity that exists in Ashtabula County. I would say that most people, if not everyone, recognizes the considerable amount of progress that we've made here in Ashtabula County over the last several years. We all can feel it. There are so many good things happening here in the county, and we want those to continue. We've built a strong foundation with this facility, and we're certainly going to pass that opportunity off to the state. And now it's our opportunity for us to now focus on the next opportunity, the next project. So we can move the needle a little further here in Ashtabula County. I wouldn't be here today if I certainly didn't support tourism and support the wine industry, support any number of economic development efforts that are underway in our county. But guess what? We've got more economic development opportunities on the way. We've got more big projects on the way. And this is an opportunity now for us to have some resources to tackle those next projects that provide more job opportunities, that provide more economic benefits to those that have certainly live here and visit here. So this legislation certainly is an opportunity to do that. And I recognize certainly we have some strong opinions on this issue. So that's why I'm going to welcome any questions that we get here after the presentation so that we can go through those and of course answer each and every one of them.
Thank you, Casey. We've already actually gotten some questions in. At this point, I want to talk a little bit about the finances. So essentially, folks have been asking all these questions about, well, I didn't think that we had any more debt, or I thought the lodge actually covered all the different expenses, or how big an economic driver is the lodge, or why is only money being spent in a certain area, for example, in our county, or why can't we refinance the debt? So there's a whole bunch of different kind of pieces financially that go into this process that I want to break down for you real quick. And while I do so, I want to certainly echo Casey's comments. We love the lodge. We think that it is a big piece of our county. It's it's something that I'm glad, and I'm happy to say this. I'm glad it was built. I'm glad it's here. I'm glad for the economic impact that the lodge has had for Ashtabula County. And just as Commissioner Kozlowski shared, now that we're almost 15 years or so past the construction, and now that we're looking towards other projects, I think the conversation has been since the construction of the lodge, well, how are we going to be paying for it, and how can we get rid of the debt? And so the conversation that Commissioner Kozlowski has shared is essentially the idea that we can keep the lodge here, we can keep it operating, and we can get rid of the debt. And the debt is a little bit complicated. So I've shared in some of the public information and outreach that this was a bad financial deal. And what I mean by that is not that the lodge has not done great things. The current management company, Delaware North, that manages the lodge, has not done great things, because they have, and our lodge has. But the actual pure financing of the lodge was a bad deal. And I can share with you several examples. For one, the cost overruns were just incredibly large. The lodge itself, and we don't have specifics because of records retention and just the time frame that's gone by, but it cost anywhere between $22 to $25 million when original estimates were more in the range of $10 million. The financing of the project following the construction was such that there were several years that we paid interest only on the debt. And anyone that has a mortgage out there will know, or a credit card will know, if you pay interest only or the minimum payments for a good number of years, that costs you in the end. And in this case, it's costing our taxpayers. And we've also refinanced the debt quite a bit. In fact, there were several years where the county refinanced the debt purely to not pay the debt payment. Now, this past year, we did refinance in 2020, and we took advantage of record low interest rates, which saved the taxpayers roughly about $2 million. And it actually cut the time frame of the loan as well by about 2 years. So that was a smart refinancing. Now, the actual debt itself, Commissioner Kozlowski had mentioned that we still owe the taxpayers, the county, because ultimately the full faith and credit of the county is on the hook. We still owe about $13.1 million in the construction debt and about $2 million in other loans. Now, just to make this as simple as possible, we're just going to look at the construction debt. So there's two different bonds that we have out for this debt. The first one is from 2013, and it will be done in 2024. We still have remaining on this first bond, as you can see here, $2.3 or so million worth. Now, revenue is important because, as I shared, I've had many outreach and questions, and as Commissioner Kozlowski shared, this budget proposal did kind of come up quick. We've had about a week to share out information to the public, and I know I've spoken with probably hundreds of individuals, as have our other county officials, and I had many questions answered, but happy to be answering more. So the revenue is important because of that question of, folks, many individuals in our county thinking that the lodge is sustaining itself, and or that on the flip side, that the lodge isn't profitable and it's not really doing anything for the county. Again, nothing can be further from the truth on the profitability side. Actually, our revenue that we got in, what we were paid by the net profit from the lodge operations itself, actually was just over $400,000. That's a great number. That's a positive number. And additionally, the CVB, our Convention and Visitors Bureau, they contribute $50,000 annually as well. We also receive rent proceeds from a land lease with the management company, Delaware North. And as you can see, that's $100,000 guaranteed from the cottages that probably many of you have seen, along with $50,000 guaranteed from the zip line, plus some extra gross profits as well. So you combine the $415,000 of net profit from just the lodge itself, plus the $195,000 from the net profit from the cottages and the zip line, and you get right around $600,000 from net profit, which is tremendous. Like I said, it's a good thing. Additionally, revenue into this bond is about 90% of the CFA bed tax. Now, this is the bed tax that folks, when they visit here in the county, they'll pay to the County Convention Facilities Authority, and that's just over $300,000. 90% of that revenue that's collected actually goes towards paying down the debt for the lodge. And additionally, the Geneva on the Lake Village and Visitors Bureau as well contributes $40,000 annually. And so, I mentioned the idea that the lodge with revenue, some folks believing that it can cover the debt service. And unfortunately, like I said, even at $600,000 a year, which is tremendous, and it's increasing, it's great. It just shows that every year it's improving a little bit more as our tourism, as our economy as a whole in the county grows. But it's still not going to match what the debt service is. Even if we average out the entire payments, at 13.1 million or so over the next 10 years, you still have about 1.3 million in average per year of payments, and you're just not going to get there. And so you're going to need other contributions, other dollars, frankly, in many cases, other tax dollars, whether they're from bed tax, which are from tourists, from folks outside the county, and here's the second bond, the 2020 series bond. This is the bond that I just shared. We refinanced this past year and took advantage right around 2% or so, probably the best we're ever going to get in terms of interest rates. Now, this amount is just shy of $11 million or so. And currently, and what the trajectory plan is, and this, of course, can change as with contribution changes or as with different agreements. And I think, frankly, the conversation that we've been having with local governments and different entities has shown that there's a strong willingness to be contributing to those. Those 2020 bond series, just shy of $11 million currently, is coming all from inside millage. And so put my auditor real estate hat on, inside millage, every property here in the county, every property taxpayer pays 10 mills or $10 per $1,000 of value of their property in inside millage. And that's split out between all these different entities, every single entity that is on your property. And that's a guaranteed 10 mil tax charge. Everything else, the levies are on top of it. So the county receives a portion of the inside millage, and that's always designated towards economic development. Well, since the inception of the lodge, that number, that inside millage, that property tax amount, has been used to supplement any of the possible shortfalls with revenue or any of the differences with bed tax, for example. I think back to the Great Recession when our economy in the county was not doing well. And essentially, unfortunately, property taxpayers had to really kind of supplement that loss in revenue. And so as it stands today, and like I said, these numbers could change in terms of future agreements or what have you. Roughly 10.8 million will be paid by county taxpayers, and the rest, about 2.3, will be paid through economic payments. And that's from tourists, that's from other entities, and that's essentially what we're looking at moving forward. Now, looking back, because many folks have shared concerns or questions. Well, how much have we exactly paid on the lodge, and what have we contributed towards it over the years, or I was promised this or that. So total debt payments from 2007 until 2021, we've paid a little over $19 million. Ashtabula County has towards your lodge. And so when you add 19, a little over 19 and a little under 11, that's where we get roughly about $34 million in total that will have contributed towards the construction of the lodge. Now, of that 19 million, going back down through that economic-based revenue, total net profit of the lodge is about $2.7 million or so. That's from 2007 to 2021. That's how much the net profit of the lodge. Now we add in, of course, from the lodge assets, that's $758,000 or so. So you're looking at about $3.4 million, and if you want to look at net profit of the 19 million that has been spent on the lodge. And the rest shakes out as such. Contributions from the Convention and Visitors Bureau, from Geneva Lake Village, and from Geneva Lake Convention and Visitors Bureau, just over $600,000. And contributions, the largest one is from bed tax, from the CFA. That's 90% of the CFA's bed tax, and that's just over $3 million or so. So in total, rough numbers, economic-based revenue has been just over $7 million, and the property taxpayer has funded just over $13.5 million, or 65%. And so we look at this as, in true sense, the lodge would not be here without the property taxpayer, without the Ashtabula County resident who pays their taxes every year. And so first and foremost, that's who we're looking out for, and that's kind of the focus that we have when applying this policy and when looking at the proposal is this number. Now, I did get a question, for example, about, well, how much of the property, how much of the bed tax does the lodge actually contribute to the county? And so pulled this over the last 3 years. Now 2020 was actually, again, our county has kind of beat all the odds in terms of COVID, but 2020 was actually a great year for the lodge and for the county at large with bed tax. So average over the last 3 years has been about 26% of the bed tax brought in for the county, or just over $250,000 a year has been brought in by the lodge bed tax. And I bring that up as well to kind of give a sandwich to this and share that almost all of these economic payments, except for the actual net profit of the lodge, all of these are what we would call general fund dollars. So as Commissioner Kozlowski shared, they can be used for other projects. So the lodge is here, we have the debt payments, we're contributing tax dollars and bed tax dollars and other economic numbers towards the payment of the lodge. And we're able to do some more investments, we're able to improve the lodge here and there, but we're not able to use that money for other economic development projects or matching grants or whatever might be in the best interest of the county, because it's being paid towards the interest and towards the actual debt payment. And so those funds can be used much more for return on our investment if they're put into new endeavors and new projects. And bed tax being a great example. I know that there's a concern, and I would encourage you to do your own homework and reach out. Some of our tourism professionals here in the county have raised some questions and concerns, and they are the professionals when it comes to tourism. So we can only kind of look at this from our perspective and from a certain lens. But there is the concern that you compare other state lodges and our state lodge, which is currently owned by the county, and you'll see that there's a large difference, that ours is exceedingly better, that ours has higher bed rates, that ours does more programming and more opportunities for the guests. And so you can bring in more funds as opposed to a traditional state lodge. And that may absolutely be the case. I haven't myself done a specific study, but one of the examples is 90% of the bed tax currently is going towards right back into the lodge. If we can relieve our debt and still have the lodge, still have it there managed well, still have folks coming into the county, which just because of the location, because of the offerings, and now because of the diversity of our tourism industry, still have as strong as ever. We can take advantage of those funds in a much more effective way than paying on debt service while having the state run the system. So that's a quick nutshell of some of the financing, some of the background of where we've gotten. Both Commissioner Kozlowski and I were, myself elementary school, Commissioner Kozlowski, I think middle school, when the lodge was built. And so we've heard all the stories. We know about some of the background, but that we weren't involved. That's beyond what we're looking at is at present and at future for where is the financial health and stability of our county going to go. And this is a little bit more information on that. So again, I encourage you, send in questions that we'll be getting to, and I'll ask Commissioner Kozlowski to finish up the presentation.
Thank you, David. I really feel it was important to of course, look at the financial scope of things and how the numbers work out. And I think David laid it out very well as it relates to the contributions that are made to the facility. Now, one other thing, and I don't know if it's possible to take a look at that first slide again, but you do reference the 90% from the CFA's contribution. And this parlays somewhat into the first question that we have here. But 90% of the CFA's contribution, of course, goes for debt service. But the CFA was a funding mechanism that was set up by the county many years ago as a method to meet the debt obligation at that time. Currently, in Ashtabula County, we have a 5% bed tax, and then local communities can assess a bed tax above and beyond that. But the bed tax, a portion of it goes to the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and that's the marketing arm for the county to support our tourism industry. And the other allocation goes to the CFA. So to be clear, all lodgers throughout Ashtabula County, all lodging entities are assessed the lodging tax. And then a portion of that lodging tax then is used for debt service for the lodge and given to the Convention and Visitors Bureau. And also to parlay into the first question, where will those kind of dollars go or be reinvested? Perhaps the CVB's contribution, that would no longer be required. So they would now have that allocation that they'd be able to keep within their own coffers to be able to support marketing efforts of their entity. The CFA's contribution, no longer needed. That is an opportunity to use those dollars for other perhaps tourism-related efforts here in Ashtabula County or even beyond. One thing that I mentioned early on in my presentation was, our inability sometimes to meet some of the match obligations for some of our grants. This perhaps is an opportunity to use these funds as a way to serve as a grant match. Above and beyond that, some of the freed up resources that would exist as it relates to the roughly $1.3 million allocation that we make for the facility is to use those funds to support public safety projects here in the county, an opportunity to support, of course, grant matches, water and sewer projects, or perhaps any number of other economic development projects that could come our way. So one difficult situation, we're like so many local governments, is we're always struggling to find dollars to meet the needs in our community, in our county, and so on. And there are grant opportunities out there. And sometimes we're unable to pursue them because we don't have that local match obligation. So to be able to free up some of those resources, stretch that dollar as best we can, and use those funds in a way to support projects here in Ashtabula County, that certainly is a big win. And I also feel it's important because I've had this question asked a few times, is the money going to be diverted to support the new jail? It's not. I want to be clear that measure is on the November ballot, and the voters will have an opportunity to make a decision as it relates to this project. So that's a separate question that you'll have an opportunity, of course, to provide input on as it relates to the jail project.
That's a very good point. And of course, those funds are, should the levy pass this November, the sales tax question, those funds are directly only able to use for public safety versus the funds that we are currently using for debt payments here for the Geneva Lake Lodge can be used for a variety of different sources. So we had our first question answered. Thank you. The next question is, could you please elaborate on the actual language of the bill or the process of what this is actually going to look like as we understand it right now, so that folks can understand where we are.
Mm-hmm. So I do want to preface by saying that the conference committee is meeting today, or they may have already met today, and the House and Senate is currently considering the budget proposal. So there most certainly is an opportunity, as with any legislation that makes its way through Columbus, for it to change. I would consider the legislation as it stands and as we've spoken to before in some prior discussions for it to be fluid, and there is an opportunity for it to be modified. But as it relates to this legislation, it does require the Ohio Department of Natural Resources to enter into an agreement with Ashtabula County. And I think that's really important. They must enter into an agreement. And there was a lot of debate or question over the shall component. Why shall? Well, the shall makes it pretty clear that the state is going to, should there be an agreement, would take on the debt obligation. Obviously right now under existing agreements, that does not happen. Under existing agreements, the facility would transition to the state once free and clear. An overarching theme behind the legislation is that the state of Ohio, of course, assumes this asset in an expedited fashion, but also assumes some of the debt that goes along with it. So I think that is really the important part of things as it relates to this legislation. And I would also note that in addition to this legislation, that it does make allocations, and this is why it's part of the budget process. It does make some allocations within the Ohio Department of Natural Resources line item to support some costs that may be associated with a transition.
Another question that we're getting a few times is essentially, what's an example of a big project that the county might have in mind that has a large economic impact that could be the same as the lodge or bigger? And I'll take a stab at that real quick. In my mind, and I'm looking at real estate trends, I'm looking at who's coming into the county, for example, and why are they coming in? I'm looking at what the needs are. And probably the largest need that I see, frankly, is broadband. My parents, who live in Colebrook, don't have access to internet. I believe Commissioner Kozlowski's parents don't either. Commissioner Winnington does not have access to internet at her home. And I don't see how we can be competitive as a county in the 21st century without that type of investment. And that's an example of a very, essentially service that local government can provide, can help to be a part of, that really will help to expand. And we talk about attracting businesses, attracting younger families, professionals, for example. So that's just always kind of the first thing that comes to my mind when we talk about economic impact is broadband examples. But Commissioner Kozlowski, if you have other ideas.
Yeah, that's a great point, and certainly one of the points that I was going to mention. But one thing I like to say, and I think many have noticed it over the last few years, Ashtabula County kind of used to be a hidden secret. We kind of recognize what we had here, but perhaps others didn't. But of course, we had many that would visit the region and enjoy the many things that we have to offer here. But perhaps not as many realized all that we had here in Ashtabula County. And I think more and more by the day are realizing all the beautiful assets that we have here to enjoy. And many new people are moving into our community. And one of the very conversations that we're having right now as part of the comprehensive planning process is the necessity to have core infrastructure in place to support future development here in the county. So David mentioned broadband. Broadband is an essential utility in the 21st century. If we want to be competing with other counties, other states for businesses, expansion opportunities, broadband is something most certainly we have to have. We have to have high-speed internet to bring in some new business, and above and beyond that, to support residents that live here in Ashtabula County already and that don't have the privilege to enjoy high-speed internet. And so many things are done now virtually. Of course, this opportunity right here requires a high-speed internet connection, but for telehealth, for education, to pursue your college degree, and to be quite honest, what's going to, I believe, evolve considerably in the post-COVID climate is working from home. The number of people that will be working from home, I think, is going to evolve considerably. And most certainly, 9 times out of 10, having a high-speed internet connection is going to be important. Water and sewer infrastructure also very important. When a business is looking to invest in a certain area, that's a necessity. They most certainly need to have water and sewer infrastructure in place to support those efforts. And then, of course, we have a number of economic development projects that are being talked about right now, and we're certainly in negotiations with them, having conversations to work with them to help meet the needs that exist for these companies to come to our community. Some economic development projects that are on the horizon, which is encouraging and will certainly help with our bed tax collection, is the 2 hotels that are currently in the works. We have the new hotel in Osterberg that's about to come to fruition. They've been spending quite some time working on that project, but we're excited to bring them on board to meet a lodging shortage that most certainly exists during the summer months. And that'll be an additional lodging tax opportunity. And it's been publicly announced that adjacent to the Spire facility in Harpersfield, an additional hotel, which is, of course, another exciting project that will certainly help enhance our lodging tax opportunities, but also meet a housing need that exists with that facility. So I think as it relates to what are some of the economic development projects, I mean, there's a number of them that most certainly we want to be able to support in any way possible so that we're meeting the needs that exist for today and most certainly for tomorrow.
Another question, resident is asking essentially if we've looked at how much revenue the lodge generates and contributes and how was it performed to other state-run lodges, and what potential loss in business might be weighed against that $13 million or so in debt payments. The person shares that they believe the main concern that people have is that the state will not run the lodge as well as it's being run now. So, I can kind of take a stab at that first. As an example, and this is something to kind of think about, our sales tax here in the county, it's 1%. We average about $12 million over the past couple of years. We've been growing steadily from about $9 million 5 years ago. So $12 million, that's about $1.2 billion worth of sales, worth of things that are taxable from a sales component that then contribute down. So that's a huge, huge number. And so when we talk about, what does that actually, what contributes to a sales tax, what type of economic numbers goes into that, we also look at how large our tourism industry is, and it's massive. It's I believe the current numbers are anywhere between 450 million to possibly $500 million of economic impact. Now, that's not necessarily sales taxable, right? So some of the impact is going to be payroll for folks, or it's going to be different purchases or construction or investments and that type of thing. And so if you look at essentially where are different sectors of the economy, and then you break it down even more and you share that, based on what is tourism, based on that section of our economy, it's a huge section. It's diverse, it's strong, it's been growing. And so then break it down even more and then ask, well, lodging. Okay, so we have just shy of about 400 lodgers here in the county, lodging entities that collect bed tax. And as I shared, the lodge is, of course, it's the largest facility with the highest room rents. It brings in about 25% of the bed tax. And so, you can kind of weigh all those and you start to break them down and you show that the lodge is a big piece. It's important. It could even be, some might say the centerpiece of our tourism, but it's not the be all and end all in a sense of what our tourism has become here in the county. So there has not been, to my knowledge, an actual, directed economic impact study of the lodge and of its contributions. As I shared, certainly, especially when it was built and as it was growing and as our overall tourism industry and the offerings here in the county have grown, it was a big piece. But now, you compare us to 10 years ago and we're quite developed, with the lodge being a piece of that. But I would almost argue it's now self-sustaining, more so than what it was in the past, which is why I believe firmly that the lodge is a good thing. It's just now looking at the debt components, if we have an option for the debt to be taken care of and the lodge still to be here, then that's a win-win. But Commissioner Kozlowski, I think you could speak more to perhaps some of the other state lodges and some of the different comparisons.
Yeah, so I certainly would echo the auditor's sentiments as it relates to the facility and its impact here in our county. There's no question our facility is right up there at the top. One of the top ranked facilities as it relates to all state lodges in the state of Ohio. Very successful facility, and I certainly love the efforts of the management firm Delaware North, who has managed that facility from day one. And I want to make it abundantly clear. This is in no way a knock on Delaware North. They're doing a fantastic job at our facility, and that's perhaps somewhat of a misconception that I've heard amongst some out there. The comment being that certainly want to retain county control and so on. But I want to make it clear that the county commissioners, we're not the day-to-day managing entity of the facility. We actually bid that out publicly. That's part of a public RFP process, just as the state lodges are as well. And they are a management firm, Delaware North, based out of Buffalo, New York, and they manage the day-to-day operations for the facility. So they, of course, are there on the ground level each and every day, working to make that facility, of course, as successful as it can be. Now, I also want to make clear that yes, we'll realize certainly some debt savings by this transition, but the lodge is not going away. The lodge is not. It's going to continue to remain a tremendous asset that we have here in our backyard that is benefiting visitors alike. People come from all over the region to enjoy the lodge and the many amenities that it has to bring. And the many come to enjoy, of course, the state park property that the very facility sits on. So that's not going away. But this is an opportunity for us to expedite the transition to the state, free up some of those local resources that then can be used to tackle some certainly other projects here in Ashtabula County to benefit the residents of the county.
I think, as well, and I share with folks, there's business models, different business models. Some of the state lodges here in Ohio follow a business model that is very low overhead. Essentially, is for everyday Ohioans. And it's kind of a place, I think of Mohican, Salt Lake Fork, different places like that, Henderson, for example, where essentially you go and you just relax. You're there, you're not really doing much, you're in the middle of perhaps nowhere, I might even say. Whereas our lodge follows a completely different business model. It's so intertwined with the local economy because there's so much here to do, and it does cater to a different subsection of Ohio and of the surrounding region. And so it's a very successful business model. As I shared, it's profitable. I don't think there's anything to say that the state wouldn't necessarily completely keep the business model or make some small alterations, but largely keep it profitable and keep it going in that sense.
Yeah, and when the facility was first built, we didn't have all that we have here today. David mentioned the number of lodging options. We have a large number of lodging options now in Ashtabula County. And certainly the lodge has helped raise the profile for these facilities as well. We certainly have some very nice lodging options for visitors to enjoy here in our county. But what's also great is we have by the day new opportunities for lodging that pop up here in the county. And as I mentioned, 2 additional hotels that will be coming on board in the coming years is also an opportunity for us to build on the many successes that we've had here in our county, meet a lodging shortage that exists here in our county, and certainly allow for continued collaboration and cooperation with many of our local facilities. Our wineries are, certainly teaming up with our the Covered Bridge team over there, and perhaps traversing and seeing all that we have here in the county. I mean, we've got so much to offer, and there most certainly is that opportunity moving forward for us to continue to build on our many great assets here in our backyard.
Next question is a little more technical. So is the debt financed by a revenue bond? And if so, can you talk a little bit about that? So our debt, both those bonds are financed essentially by the full faith and credit of the county. So it's backed actually by our ability to have that inside millage, to always be guaranteed a certain amount of revenue from essentially the property taxpayers from inside millage. And the idea that is essentially our backup for payment. So it's not a direct, for example, going back to the jail project, that being a levy that's passed based on sales tax with a certain amount of revenue likely estimated, that will be a direct revenue bond where it's based on that actual amount. Or you can think of like a fire truck, for example. This is a little bit more flexible, which is great. And in the past, we've been able to move revenue around to be able to adjust and to fit. But ultimately, and that's the 2020 series bonds, it is backed by revenue coming in from our property taxpayers at the very end of the day. So next question, 2020 was obviously a stunted year. And what were the numbers, in 2015 to 2019, what were they averaging? So I don't have the numbers going back 2015, 16, those ranges, which I can certainly get if folks would like, reach out. We had our emails at the beginning, or you can just reach out to us personally to see some of that. But actually, based on the revenue that we brought in from 2020 or for 2020, for the lodge, actually, it was up. Bed tax was right about flat. And so we've been seeing steady increases over the past couple of years in all of our revenue sources. So it actually is not all that bad of a comparison. We use 2020 just because that's the most recent year, but actually most of that revenue was able to stay flat, which is great. What provisions are being made to ensure the state runs the lodge like it ran today?
Yeah, so great question, and a question that's come up a few times. So as it relates to the agreement, from my view, before the county enters into an agreement with the state of Ohio, there certainly are some protections that we'd like to put in place to ensure that we're protecting this tremendous asset we have here in our community. So some points have been brought up. How are we going to work to ensure that funds generated here stay here and are reinvested into our facility? So as part of the current operations plan, we have a capital plan, and that's specifically an R&R fund, and we generate funds. A percentage of revenues are then set aside in a fund to support continued investments into maintenance of the facility. So we certainly would want to work to ensure that that continues as part of a transition, that there's a plan to reinvest in that facility so that it stays a great facility as it is today. One other unique arrangement that is somewhat exclusive of our lodge compares to those of others in the state of Ohio is we assess a resort fee. So for each night, each guest room is assessed a resort fee, and those funds are then used to support efforts that kind of provide enhancement to those that stay at the facility. So guest amenities. So it's working out great as it relates to helping to invest in some of the improvements in and around the facility. For example, the pool deck expansion project that perhaps some of you have read about was a project that we were able to get covered entirely using the resort fee funds. So maintaining that certainly would be a great opportunity for continued guest enhancements to be made to that facility. So all things that certainly will be part of a conversation that we would like to have before most certainly we allow for this transition to occur.
Next question is another good one. So how much will property owners see a reduction in their property taxes if this is approved? And so going back to the conversation about inside millage, as I shared, every property here in the county is charged that 10 mills. And if the county were, for example, and this happens occasionally, let's say a village dissolves and part of their inside millage then is no longer needed for the village, but what actually happens, and this is all based on state formulas, that amount, that charge goes to another entity. For example, a school district could pick it up or a county could pick it up. And so the actual debt amount that property taxpayers are paying currently towards the lodge debt, we cannot reduce it. We can't get rid of it. It can't go away because it will always be there. The key, and I think what's important, is that, again, the idea of return on investment. So what can we be using those funds for? And I would argue, for example, the county has other large debts that are currently being assessed onto us, and we're being charged interest for those. That's costing, again, more money to be kept in certain focuses and away from more general spending for economic development and for projects. And so that's one possibility where we can actually save on future payments by paying off a little bit more of certain debts, or investing in other areas that could theoretically lower lowered down, folks' taxes. Now, there are other payments that go in, like I said, not just property taxes, but there's the bed tax. And that's money that 90% of the CFA, as Commissioner Kozlowski said, about, what was it, 300,000 or so that I shared. That money can actually be used very similarly in other purposes to, in some cases, perhaps lower down fees, or to be able to invest in other possibilities. And so there would not be a direct, and I've been very open and shared this to try and explain as easy as you can explain property taxes to folks, because it is very complicated, but there would not be a direct, it's not like with sales tax where we could decrease it, 0.5%, for example, but it would be an indirect savings, certainly for every property owner here in the county. Next question is, what is the yearly lease for the land?
Yeah, so great question. It's $10 per year.
For that property, that's a bargain. Oh, so that's an easy one. And I should also say too, going back a little bit as well, this money, the $1.3 million or so, it prevents the need, let's say, for example, and heaven forbid, but most folks call me the realist Debbie Downer. Let's say, for example, there's a recession next year, and all of a sudden, all of our revenues, naturally, they go down. Well, we still have to provide essential services, things like public safety, things like the courts, things like plowing and paving. And without flexibility of revenue, what does that mean? That means either essential services have to get cut, or other revenue has to be found in certain ways. So this revenue could be used in those purposes as well. You always have to be essentially just like your own checkbook, making sure that you've got some wiggle room and some safety nets. So next question, if we believe the majority of county taxpayers support this, why not post a public poll on Facebook? It's something quick and easy to do. Well, have you been on Facebook lately? No. It's, I can't speak for Commissioner Kozlowski or others, but I certainly do believe that a majority of the property taxpayers, certainly in our county, and a majority of the residents at large in our county support the lodge, but also would agree that given the provision for giving the lodge to the state in 2040 for free as it currently stands, or being able to recoup some of the funds that we've already spent, I certainly think that it would be option number two, being able to save those resources and invest them in other places.
Yeah, I most certainly agree.
Yeah. Will the CFA exist if this is approved?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That's most certainly a conversation that we will have as we move forward. Should we come to an agreement and agree with a transition, that is a conversation that we will have. Ultimately, the CFA generates a large amount of funds. It varies by the year, but between $300,000 to $400,000 on an annual basis. And again, that is the lodging tax that's assessed above and beyond the lodging tax obligation that supports the county's Convention and Visitors Bureau. I want to be clear, these are two separate entities. The County Convention and Visitors Bureau is the marketing arm to support the tourism industry here in Ashtabula County. The Convention and Facilities Authority was a mechanism created many years ago to support debt service payments for this facility. My thought process being, obviously if we no longer have the debt, is there a need for the CFA anymore? Or is there an opportunity to utilize those funds to support other endeavors here in Ashtabula County? Certainly a conversation we will have as we move forward.
Being flexible, for sure. We actually had two questions. Came in at the exact same time. Must have been right after you said it, Casey. Thank you all for still being here and listening. And we have a lot of questions, like we said, but we want to get through them all to share information. So two folks asked the same question. Just a quick point in Casey's opening statement. He indicated that the citizens of Ashtabula County voted on the construction of the lodge. This individual shares they wanted to vote, but the decision to build it was made by Commissioner Boggs, Newcomb, and Fear in the resolution 2002-569. So that person's informed. But another person said, didn't the voters vote for the lodge, or did they not? Same as you stated for a jail. Can you explain?
Yes, so let me clear that up. Yeah, if you got the impression that I said that the voters voted on the Geneva Lodge, they did not. They did not. That was not a question posed to the voters. That, in fact, was a decision made back in 2002, if I'm not mistaken, and that would have been the commissioners at that time. I believe Commissioners Boggs, Newcomb, and Fear were the commissioners at that time. That was a decision made by them. It was not put up to a public vote. I want to be absolutely clear about that. Sorry if you got that impression.
Next question, and like I said, I'm reading every question. So it's obvious you've made up your minds on this. So this is just an informational meeting, not one where those disagree can use as a platform to change your minds. This sure is happening fast. We hear about it, and the vote is taking place within 2 weeks. What would you say about that?
So I would note that the budget bill is being considered in Columbus, but I would say that most certainly the debt conversation, and as it relates to the debates over the funding mechanism and how the facility was built, has been an ongoing conversation, quite honestly, since 2002. So this is something that's been ongoing, and from my perspective as a commissioner, when there perhaps was an opportunity to look at ways to free up our resources, free up and preserve a tremendous asset we have here in our backyard, that most certainly was a conversation I was willing to be a part of, to be able to see if there was an opportunity for us to free up those resources and be able to use those to support other endeavors here in Ashtabula County. But I want to be abundantly clear that an agreement still must be put into place before our transitions occur. And we certainly want to ensure that many of the concerns that have been exhibited here are certainly echoed and are part of a conversation should an agreement be put into place.
And I think over the past, since the budget language was released and we were informed about this, I think we've several of us, myself, Commissioner Kozlowski, Commissioner JP Ducro, and others have been constantly trying to inform the public just about. I think we realized very quickly that there's a lot of facts about the lodge, especially the financial side and the policy side, that may not have been known. And so, we wanted to essentially bring this directly to folks, and we have a little over 100 people watching, which is wonderful. And we ask you to share with your friends some of the information that you've learned today. So next question, is there any possible way we may have say or input on who manages the facility moving forward?
Sure. So I can speak to how it's been customarily done. So here in Ashtabula County, it's been a public RFP process. So, obviously we generate a request for a proposal. So we kind of put together what the framework of the proposal looks like. And then any entity in the state of Ohio that meets the certainly guidelines to bid on contracts here in Ashtabula County has an opportunity to vie for that for that operating award. So it's a public process as it relates to how that works, and certainly under the current arrangement, the current operator with Ashtabula County, they operate through the end of 2026, and there's an opportunity for a 10-year extension to 5-year increments that would run it through 2036. And then, after that, there is an opportunity to go out for, again, public RFP for other providers to have the opportunity to bid to manage the facility.
Other than the state owning the land, why would they be willing to add it to their budget? Either way, they get the lodge in the end. So this was a budget amendment, budget language that was added by State Senator Sandra O'Brien into the state budget to give an appropriation for ODNR to essentially pay for the back debt of the lodge and then assume the management of it. So this was not a move by ODNR to take the lodge early. This is actually our state legislator acting and appropriating. I believe I've been told this is probably one of the largest appropriations to Ashtabula County in the past couple of decades. So this was her intent to essentially relieve the county, relieve us as taxpayers of that burden to pay for the debt and do what will be happening anyway in 2040, which is move over the management. As I've shared probably to almost everybody I've talked to, the state does two things. They'll either give you some money up front when you're building a facility to help you pay for it. I certainly wish that happened back in when they were constructing this. Or they'll give you maybe a little bit of money, or they'll give you a wink and a nod when they take that asset from you and then manage it. So the state does not, though, unfortunately, pay money to pay off debt, or oftentimes we've seen this decrease over the years for operating expenses. There really are only typically two options. And so that's essentially to relieve that debt burden is why this was put into the budget bill. Next question is speaking to the budget bill and the timeframes. Why is it that no one knew about this until Senator Bryan did a press release in the first part of June? And why were there no public hearings to address the sale?
Sure. So thank you for that question. I can tell you this has certainly been a conversation that the senator, certainly talked about on the campaign trail back in 2020. That certainly was something that certainly was discussed. Now, as it relates to this legislation, this kind of expedites the transfer. So this is something that currently under existing agreements already happens. This under the proposed legislation, it just happens a little sooner with the state of Ohio bearing a little bit of the debt burden. But I also want to make it abundantly clear that I will not support or sign off on an agreement until we address some of the concerns that have been exhibited with us over the last a week or so as it relates to making sure that continued investments happen at that facility and that we preserve this asset as best we can moving into the future. So those most certainly will be conversations that we'll have over the coming days, weeks, and months, most certainly.
Next question. This goes back to our conversation about what could some of the uses for these funds be. Is it the county's responsibility to put in high-speed internet for private residents? What about private companies? And so, no, of course, it's not our direct responsibility, but internet and connection to the internet is now essentially considered very akin to water, sewer, other infrastructure pieces that are essential for life here in the 21st century. And because we're the largest county here in the state of Ohio, and because of our economic demographics, we are not very, unfortunately, Silicon Valley isn't chomping at the bit to come in and invest in fiber and invest in Wi-Fi services here in the county. And so that's a piece of essentially essential services, which the county has been in conversations with Commissioner Ducro leading the charge and doing a great job at that. And this could be one avenue where we use these funds, for example, for matching dollars with state or federal grants or in conjunction with other pieces. But it's not a direct necessity such as water or sewer or septic, but it's certainly inching its way up there. Random question, but why not? Is there any new information on the potential large warehouse in the Osterberg area?
Yeah, so that's an exciting project that is still in the works, but I can certainly talk about it because it's been, shared publicly. But there is a proposal in the works just north of I-90 in behind Flying J for a large distribution facility to locate their operations here. We're talking hundreds of jobs and certainly a large economic investment being made here in Ashtabula County. So they are actually still working out some of the details on that arrangement, but certainly I've been part of those conversations. It's very encouraging, and I'm very excited about it because that means more job opportunities for Ashtabula County residents. It means, of course, an opportunity for more dollars to be invested here into our community. And it also means, of course, more attention on Ashtabula County, which I always love. We're certainly making some positive headlines here in the county, and I'm really excited about this project. So yes, still in the works, and it's moving swiftly, and we're hopeful that we can kind of bring that to a close and allow for construction to start on that project. So, of course, COVID and other things have had an impact in some way on some of these projects. So it's been a little slower than I would have liked, but hopeful that we'll work through the last remaining items that remain on the project so they can start, getting the shovels out, moving some dirt, and getting that project started.
Next question, is this issue going to be public and going to be voted on by the public?
So that's a great question. If there was a legal mechanism to do that, I would be in full support of it. If anybody wants to do any research, if there's any opportunity to pose this question to the voters, to the taxpayers of Ashtabula County, I would certainly be supportive of that. I'm not aware of such where you can actually put this as a referendum effort on the ballot. But if there were to be a way that could be found, I'd be in full support of that to pose the question to the voters. Absolutely.
Next question. Opportunity to get rid of debt is always a good idea. Getting the state to take it over is a good opportunity. We don't have a crystal ball, but do you think what do you think the chances are of the state ultimately agreeing to this?
I'm sorry, David, could you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. So in essence, what do you believe the chances are of the state essentially signing on to this?
I think the prospects are good. Obviously, the language, as part of the language, there must be an agreement entered into. I think we're going to have a conversation, perhaps multiple conversations, to formulate that agreement to allow for the transition to occur. But I think the prospects are good, but I don't want to say that anything is final until it actually happens.
So other than the state owning the land, why would they be willing to add it into their budget? But I think we actually already may have answered that question.
Yeah, I believe so. But perhaps from the state's perspective, this could be an opportunity for them to bear a little bit of the burden that they have not done since 2002. And since they are getting this asset in 2040 under existing agreements, this would be an opportunity for them to help chip in and free the county taxpayers of some of that obligation.
We have another question about those revenue bonds. Working with bond counsel on both of these projects, the 2013 and the 2020, and our own legal counsel here in the county, I believe we are in full compliance with essentially how we are funding those. Not having the details of those bonds right in front of me and essentially what the legal mechanisms are, I can certainly share those. Those are public documents. So if you'd like to request those or would like more information on that, feel free to reach out. But yeah, essentially my understanding is that they're backed by at least the full faith and credit of the county, with that property tax component being essentially the final catch-all. If we have been passing over questions, I apologize. I believe we've been getting to every single one. But if you have a question that's been missed, there's been a few kind of duplicate questions, so I've tried to pair those together. So if we have not got something, please let me know. Next question. Will you be seeking to be reelected to another term, Commissioner Casey?
So that decision will be made next year, actually. So the petition deadline certainly is next year. I have certainly enjoyed my 2 terms so far that I've served as Ashtabula County Commissioner. I believe we've made considerable progress, but most certainly I will be making any of those decisions, later this year into next year when it's time to file for the petition for the position. But most certainly, I love my position. It's a great opportunity, and I feel I'm making a positive difference. If I don't feel I'm making a difference in some way or making good progress, it's not something that I'd want to stay doing. But I feel that I most certainly have been able to do that, and hopeful that the residents of Ashtabula County have seen that as well. So those final decisions will be, of course, be made in the coming months. But great question. I'm glad it was asked.
So we have 2 questions that are very similar, so let's put them together. So is this an O'Brien vendetta? And Sandy O'Brien was against the lodge from the beginning. Can't help it since this has been her goal all along. With the lease amount only being $10 for the land, I realized the state would not present that rate to a private owner. But isn't it worth selling to a private investor? Spire has been sold, and events there are filling lodging from Erie to Willoughby. Why not look at other options?
David, where is that question? I'm just looking to see that. Could you repeat the question? Oh,
sure. Sandy O'Brien was against the lodge from the very beginning, and I can't help but sense that this has been her goal all along. That's part 1. Then part 2, with the lease amount being only $10, and I realized the state would not present that rate to a private owner, but isn't it worth trying to sell it to a private investor? Spire is a good example of this.
Yeah, so I can't speak for Senator O'Brien. I certainly would encourage you to have a conversation with her. I can only speak for myself in my perspective as a county commissioner. I don't think it's fair for me to speak for others. So I just want to make that abundantly clear. As it relates to the $10 lease and opportunity for a private investor. So I think you have to remember, this is a very unique arrangement that we have here in the county as it relates to this facility. We're talking land that is part of the state park. And we're also talking about a government-owned facility on state park-owned land in the state park. So those are some unique components that would make it very, I think, interesting as it relates to any private enterprise that would be fully owning the facility. As some of the conversations I've had, that could be very difficult to do that because we're talking state park property. So, I think it would be very, very tough to make that assumption that could happen. But certainly, I want to be abundantly clear that anything that were to occur on state park property, and to be quite honest, any large endeavor of any sort that takes part now on state park property requires a conversation with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources and a sign off by them. So any opportunity with this most certainly would be a conversation that we'd have with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources.
Next question, and this is referring to a previous question. The management of the facility question was referring to after the state takes ownership. Would Delaware North remain under contract, and would it still be possible to extend the contract?
So I just want to make it clear as it relates to under existing agreements, Delaware North is the management firm for the facility through 2026. And under that existing contract, they have the opportunity to seek an additional 10 years for either party to agree to a 10-year extension. And to be clear, that's in 2 5-year increments. So current obligation runs through 2026 with an additional 10 years. So that would run through the end of 2036. So that most certainly would be a conversation that we'd be having with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources.
2 questions that are pretty similar. What about the hotel on Bridge Street? Is that still on? Is the pig iron plant still being developed? And I can speak to that real quick. Pig iron plant, they just put out a press release about 2 weeks ago. Their folks were all from South Africa, the big top people in the company. So COVID put a big kibosh on that. But essentially with what, $50 to $100 million already invested in the project, they're not going anywhere. They will be staying here and beginning here this fall. I'm not too sure about the hotel on Bridge Street. I have not heard any more on that project though.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about the prospect of a hotel there on Bridge Street. I have been supportive of those efforts. The county as a whole has been supportive of those efforts. And I know there's been some conversations of late that are really encouraging on that project. So stay tuned. Also, most certainly I would stay engaged with many of the conversations that are occurring in Ashtabula City with Ashtabula City government. They've been working quite considerably on that project, the city manager, city council. So also, I would certainly be having a conversation with them about getting the latest information on that project. But I can say of late, of some of the conversations I've had, there's some good positive progress on that front.
Next question, is a copy of the agreement between the state and the county as it pertains to the lodge transfer in 2040 readily available?
Absolutely.
Has consideration been given to renegotiating the transfer to the state?
Yeah, so absolutely, that agreement most certainly is a public record, and that could be obtained from the Ashtabula County Commissioner's Office. If you would like that, certainly reach out to our clerk of the board, Lisa Hawkins, and she can certainly get that information for you. But most certainly, it's a public record. And if you're looking for contact information and the like, feel free to go to our county website, www.ashtabulacounty.us, and then hit the Commissioners tab right up top, and you'll be taken right to that page where you can email the clerk, call us as well. And our phone number, 440-576-3750 to get that information. Now, has consideration been given to renegotiating the transfer to the state? So most certainly that could be a conversation as it relates to this agreement. The existing agreement runs through 2040. So with a lot of the agreements that we've certainly been engaged in, those conversations usually happen a couple years or leading up to when a contract's set to end. So most certainly there could be an opportunity for that conversation. Also want to make it abundantly clear that we'll be having conversations with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources as part of this legislation, should it occur, and be talking about all of those agreements.
And here's something to think about too. If we take a step back, what do we know for sure and what can we assume? So we know for sure that 2040 date in terms of that being a discussion point. We also know for sure that we're having the opportunity right now to have the back debt, that $13 million plus to $15 million being taken on by the state. And so what we have assumptions though are essentially what is the context in 2040? What's the economy like right then? What is state leadership like during that time frame? What are our needs in the county? What happens between now and then, for example, with the facility? What type of updates, what type of different investments have to be put in? So there's so many different, and this is what makes this topic and conversation so challenging, is that there are many uncertainties. Even with, frankly, the commissioners keeping the lodge, for example, there are many uncertainties with how the lodge could be managed. And so, yes, that 2040 date could be possibly discussed, absolutely. But, I think we have to deal somewhat in what do we know, certainties, and what can we assume or what is uncertain in the future. Is a state-controlled lodge forced to charge underpriced controls and not free market room rate?
Sure. So that's a great question. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources, they utilize a firm. They go out for public bid, and they have a firm that manages their facilities. And they certainly have conversations as it relates to the rate structure. And the same goes for us. The county commissioners don't have a say. We don't set the rates for this facility. That's also certainly an agreement, an arrangement that we have with our operating agreement with the facility. So most certainly those are all provisions and really conversation pieces as it relates to the management firm and the state or the other entity that's a part of that contractual arrangement. They will be part of those conversations and set perhaps those rates if there's a cap and so on. So those are all negotiated items as part of operating agreements.
Next question. A number of groups have gone record against state takeover. What concerns or objections do these groups have, and are they valid? So this goes back to the idea of someone shared earlier, well, your minds are already made up. We're more than happy to share all the information. So for this person, for all those listening, yes, Geneva on the Lake Village Council made a resolution against the state ODNR taking over the lodge. Geneva City Council did as well. The County Visitors Bureau did. I believe the County CFA, the Convention Facilities Authority did. And I believe Harpersfield Township, I don't want to speak for them, there's a meeting on Saturday, but I believe they did as well. In my understanding, it's two-pronged why some of these local leaders have been voicing their opposition. One, it goes back to the communication piece. Has been mentioned in questions. Many of the local entities, local leaders, the state senator did not involve in the conversation directly right before the budget bill. Budget bills are quick-moving things, and sometimes you only have one chance with one conversation. And so they were not asked for their opinion, and rightfully so. I think many of them were taken off guard and were frustrated by that. And then two is the concern, as was raised by many questions as well, about the tourist impact and what the change would be between ODNR, between the states managing the facility and the county managing the facility. And could potential changes to management with state control, would that be more harmful or would that be less economically advantageous to the county with potentially lower room rates, or because that would be less overhead or less offerings, for example, or a change to relationships with county businesses? And so those were some of the concerns. It goes back to that uncertainty piece and not necessarily knowing what this could lead to. Now with a budget bill, you've got to appropriate the money up front, and then you unfortunately work out some of the details as it happens on the back end. So Commissioner Kozlowski mentioned that agreement, which is one piece in the current language that we've seen, which is an important aspect to be able to involve all of those local leaders and make sure that we can help kind of calm some of the possible uncertainties with what a change in management would be. Yes, Harpersfield did pass a resolution against this past Saturday. So thank you. I believe, but I didn't want to say for sure. Next question, and then we actually have a bunch of Facebook questions. So if there are any more questions on Zoom here, please feel free to keep typing them in. Like I said, we're happy to talk as long as you're on. Was ODNR Director Mary Mertz included in discussions about this possible transfer?
No, so actually, I've had conversations with the deputy director at ODNR. There have been conversations with the deputy director of the division there at ODNR, and then also conversations with other members of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources.
Next question, can you clarify, according to the current agreement with the state, will the state only take over if the $13 million or back debt is paid, or does this legislation override that? So I think there might be some confusion with the 2040 takeover and transfer. I want to use that word instead, and the legislation transfer.
So as it relates to the existing agreement, the transition would occur after the debt is paid off, which we're certainly on pace to do that before 2040. And that occurs once it's free and clear, but it has to meet the state's kind of standards. And if it does not meet the state standards, then the county would be responsible for making the improvements necessary to meet those state standards.
So next question, and there's two questions that are very similar, so I'll ask the second one, it's a little more detailed. It is our understanding that the option will be offered in 2040, going back to that 2040 discussion of transfer, but the state may choose to refuse it and to refuse to take it over, and it could remain in local hands with the county commissioners after 2040. It has also been shared that the state has no interest whatsoever in managing and maintaining additional properties. They have not had the resources to reinvest in many of the properties and parklands they currently maintain.
So it's really hard for me to speak to hypotheticals on what ODNR would do as it relates to that. So I think things that we certainly would want to do as part of an agreement is work to ensure that we're putting protections in here that protect Ashtabula County and some of the concerns that have been exhibited. So certainly we would be working with them to have those as part of a contract, an agreement of sorts that would allow for a smooth transition to occur. I don't want to speak, if I think part of the question was, what if the state refuses to do this? Again, I can't speak for the state, but if they refuse to do that and the county insists, I mean, I would anticipate a conversation, most certainly is going to be had about that. So I expect, many conversations about that over the coming weeks and months, should the legislation pass.
I think it's an interesting thought process too to think about. And fast forward to 2040, and the state has the potential. Of course, we can only assume what the economy will be like, what leadership will be like, what the attitude is like, what other lodges are going through at that point. But the state would have the possibility of inheriting free and clear, theoretically, an asset, a lodge that is likely at that time very profitable because there's not the debt payments. And so there's lots of different kind of hypotheticals and assuming that can go on in 2040, but having some of that certainty with what's going on now is an important thing to think on too. Next question, is Ashtabula County going to lose any tax revenue from the county turning the lodge over back to the state, like bed tax or sales tax? So, and this kind of goes back into there's different kind of possibilities. So let's just assume, for example, the lodge is filled every single night with every single room. And so we've got bed tax revenue, that's the most that we can collect from the lodge. Remember 90% of this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner, but 90% of that bed tax collection is actually going right back to the lodge. So the county is actually losing out, theoretically one could say, on 90% of that bed tax collection. Now let's assume the state, it's transferred to the state. Let's assume that the state decreases bed rates by maybe 10%, and let's say occupancy also decreases by 10%. Well, now you're looking at perhaps, let's say, we're between 75 to 80% of the original bed tax collected. Well, we're still actually receiving more in revenue because it's not being directed back into the lodge debt. It's going towards other resources. And so that's kind of part one of that question in a sense. And part two is the economic impact aspect. what does that look like if ODNR manages the property, and if a different demographic with different resources and spending habits comes to the lodge as opposed to what is currently coming to the lodge, and how would that trickle out? And again, I think it goes back to making kind of different assumptions of what could be the potential side effects.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify something as it relates to the bed tax. So 3% goes to the county's Convention and Visitors Bureau, and then 2% goes to the county's Convention and Facilities Authority, the CFA, and then 90% of that 2% is pledged for debt service.
I apologize. Yes, adding that extra one. Next question. Okay. What state-owned lodge can you point to that offers the same standards that Geneva Lodge offers?
So I certainly would take a look at Maumee Bay. I would say is the closest, in my opinion. I would certainly take a look at Maumee Bay. You'll look at some of those pictures, and you may think you're looking at the Geneva Lodge and Conference Center, but you're looking at the Maumee Bay facility. So I would encourage you to take a look at that one.
Okay, I believe that's all of our Facebook questions. We've got a few more Zoom questions. Is it possible that the state and county do not come to an agreement and the appropriation is not allocated as planned? What are some realistic examples of things that the county would not accept in the agreement?
So I would say it is possible that the state/county would not come to an agreement. Most definitely, I think that is possible. I want to make that abundantly clear. The commissioners have some interests that they certainly would want to protect, and those are part of conversations that we've had over the last several days from many of our community stakeholders. So certainly things that we'd want to have conversations about as part of an agreement. I would also note that what are some things that perhaps would be sticky points or sticky items that we'd want to insist that were a part of an agreement. I think it goes back to making sure that reinvestments continue to happen at that facility, that dollars stay here, are reinvested here. The fact that the resort fee is an opportunity for guest amenity enhancements at the facility, certainly something that we would want to have a conversation about. Also, of course, ensuring that the facility continues to function, in pretty much in the same fashion as it does today. All things that we'll be looking for as it relates to an agreement. And I don't want to speak for my colleagues. I'm one commissioner of three, so certainly they will probably have viewpoints as well as part of this conversation.
There was a question asked about the viewpoints of other county officials.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thank you. And I referenced other stakeholders. Most certainly, other entities are community stakeholders that we certainly want to be having a conversation with.
I think one commissioner that you may have missed or that's been discussed is essentially continuing Delaware North and that contract discussion that you had mentioned prior.
Yeah, I mentioned that early on. I guess I should have mentioned that again. But Delaware North is a great operator. We're very pleased with them and the work that they're doing at that facility. So in our vision, would love to see things as they are today. And really the only thing that changes is who technically owns the building behind the scenes and who's paying the debt.
So more questions we're getting here on Facebook and a couple more on Zoom, so keep them coming. We're happy to answer. Questions asked, it's also some of the statement too. I think that we are missing a large portion of the revenue that the lodge brings to Ashtabula County, not simply bed tax, but the overall financial impact that it has provided, such as new wineries, the increases in tourism, and money spent in the area. And Commissioner Kozlowski and I both kind of hit on that, different points that absolutely, we're both glad that the lodge is here, that it's contributing to our economy, that it's been a big, big piece of our growth over the years. I would just kind of add that because of it, in a sense, we become a lot more diversified. And our local economy has really kind of grown up and strengthened. And so it's not as big of a piece of that account success as it once was. And so looking at the number of other lodges, looking at the number of other businesses, we are now somewhat of an attraction ourselves, not just one lodging center as the attraction. So and again, we can't forecast future economic developments and what may happen. But certainly we're looking at, well, what do we know and what can we assume? That's one piece of it.
And I can't stress enough above and beyond that, the facility's not going away.
Yes.
So I think a lot of references are being made that suddenly we're going to see a dramatic reduction in revenue and all of those things. The asset's staying right here. It's not going anywhere. So I think that's really an important point to share with everyone.
Yep. Yeah, I know the comments been made several times that save the lodge, we want to save the lodge. We want to save the lodge as well. We also want to save the taxpayers and be able to invest also. So that's very important. Next question, keep them coming. If the state takes over, will it promote and market the Geneva Lodge same as other state lodges? Are they currently promoting Geneva same as the others, or would this actually be a benefit?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Now, one thing people may not realize, if you go to this, the state lodge's website and look at the state lodges and perhaps click on one, perhaps click on Maumee Bay or Salt Fork, and then look to go to another state lodge link, the Geneva Lodge is not on there, interestingly enough. So we're missing out perhaps on a little opportunity there where we're not, because we're not considered one of the, I guess, state operated lodges. We aren't reaping some of the benefits from the website presence, just as one example. So that is perhaps an opportunity for an enhancement for us to see perhaps additional opportunities by being a direct link and being, since we're considered a state lodge. We're on state lodge property and state park property, and we're part of the state system. And it just makes sense for them to all be, of course, kind of under the same umbrella. So now, as it relates to marketing efforts, most certainly, obviously there's a vision that the state has on marketing their facilities. We have one as well under the agreement with Delaware North. So certainly a conversation point as we're talking about our agreement is ensuring that our presence continues as it does now. But I also want to make it abundantly clear that, of course, our marketing arm, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, also does a very good job of marketing our region and marketing the many things that we have to offer here in our community. And I have full confidence that the CVB will continue to do that moving forward.
Final question, I think, that we have here, unless there's more, send them in. Is the change in ownership for the lodge going to have any impact on businesses surrounding the lodge, good or bad, do you think? Mm-hmm. And that kind of goes back to the question of, well, essentially, sometimes change is inevitable. Change in management, for example, I think we've all said here we don't want to see. We want to see the same management firm, and essentially it's just a matter of whose name is on that bond debt payment. So ideally, things stay relatively the same, stay relatively constant. And even with some changes, who knows, as Commissioner Kozlowski just said, what possibilities might there be with state buy-in and with state investment. So it's difficult to say what that could look like. But again, the lodge has an excellent business model that's working, that's successful. And there's an incentive, I would believe, looking at it rationally, to keep it. And to try and continue it. It's working. Yeah, except for when we add in the debt payments.
And I also want to add on to that. Obviously we're a medium-sized county. We're considered a medium-sized county as it relates to our population. There are smaller counties than us. There are bigger counties than us. Ashtabula County's general fund is about $24 million. So just putting things into perspective, and we own a facility that bears $13 million left in debt on the construction of the facility, a little over half of what the county's general fund is. Now, put it into perspective, the state's operating budget, $60+ billion.
I think it's up to 76.
Is it up to 76? Wow. So put it into perspective, who's got more resources? Who's got the ability to make investments? Who's got the bigger hand in all of this? Most certainly it's the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio has billions of dollars at its disposal. Ashtabula County's got 24 million. They've got multiple billions. So just putting things into perspective, I think that's a really important point in all this as well.
Another question, individual asked again for us to share the revenue numbers. So I will share those real quick. Essentially on the back, what we've paid moving back. So looking at this here briefly, essentially, when we look at lodge revenue, we add the net profit of the lodge over from 2007 until 2021. 2.7 million. And we would add rent proceeds from lodge assets. Now that's the zip line and that's the cottages, both which do very well. And that's $758,000. So we're looking at about 3.5 million in total that's been paid from lodge revenue from 2007 until 2021, again, with a total debt payment of $19.3 million. So those are those numbers again. Next question. Individual said that they just looked on the lodge on ODNR site and the lodge is listed.
Mm-hmm. I would encourage you to take a look. If a great example is greatohiolodges.com, one site among many others that are part of the state system. It's actually a link to the Geneva Marina. It's not a link to the Geneva Lodge. So I just think it's important to look. We're not on all of the state site or state supported sites as part of some of their contractual relationships they have as it relates to the operation of their state lodges. So a great example, if you go from the state site and then click on Maumee Bay, for example, then you want to link over to look at one of the other state lodges, the Geneva state lodges are on there.
Next question, and I said I'd read almost all of them unless they're inappropriate. How's your new puppy? Well, she's sleeping right now, so I think we're boring her, Casey.
I think so. That's all right.
Next question. Has there been a study on looking at the next 19 years of maintenance for things like roofing, parking lots, infrastructure that the county would have to pay? And is there a fund set up for that, or is that from these debt payments as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so great question. So we actually have a capital plan. There's a capital plan, and Delaware North works with us to formulate that capital plan. And that plan does span out, the next several years as it relates to investments that we'd like to see in that facility. So that, of course, is funded to a point I mentioned earlier, where percentage of revenues generated are set aside in R&R fund and a reserve fund of sorts that then supports investments back into that facility. So there's some considerable investments we're going to have to make in the coming years, and we're hopeful that the R&R fund will be able to support those endeavors, moving forward. But obviously, you never know. It's never safe to say that we're going to have all the dollars to be able to meet all the needs that exist today and into tomorrow. I mean, I don't think any of us projected COVID and perhaps the financial impact that COVID could have. So a year like that, for example, could spell disaster as it relates to an entity having the resources or being able to support a fund to support improvements down the road. So while we do our best to formulate a capital plan, obviously that's a plan and it can always change and always other things come up. So you'll also want to put it into perspective as it relates to the facility and the age. Obviously it's not getting any younger. It's becoming an older facility by the day. So something we just have to stay very cognizant of, that by the day, as years go by, of course, the more maintenance necessary to support the facility.
We had another question about the the past payments, and would we be able to, believe that the future payments could necessarily be the same, or what can that look like, and why is it, in a sense, so different? So here again are the past payments that you can see, total debt payments for the past. Now, as I shared, net profit of the lodge is moving up, which is good. Proceeds are moving up, and as part of these conversations, we've heard from local entities who have said, hey, we may be willing to chip in a little bit more money if it's needed, if it's necessary. And one can estimate, of course, that 90% of the 2% would be moving in a positive direction too. So I would certainly hope and anticipate that this number would be a little bit more flipped. And that's assuming that we're going to be able to use the same revenue sources for the 2013 bond, for the 2020 bond that we've done for the 2013 bond. But the argument, of course, is too, well, even if, let's ultimately say this becomes 50-50, taxpayers split 50%, and economic revenue funds split 50%. The question being, if we can't negotiate, if it's impossible for us to ultimately keep the facility after 2040, and we still have to give it away for free, well, that's still an investment of 50% by the taxpayers that's gone, and then funds that came from economic payments that was also gone, that could have been used for other sources here. So those are things to consider as well. I believe that we now have gotten through, there was a link that was shared with how to find the Geneva on the Lake Lodge from the OD on our website. So that would be something maybe to look at if I actually visited that website myself. But we have answered all of the, another question. Thank you both for taking the time today and answering all these questions. Truly hope and believe that you have put many more at ease with this. It's good to know that this is just the appropriation stage, that there's still an opportunity to work through the details with the states. That's pivotal right there. I think many were afraid that this was a quick rush to throw it to the state without any time for further negotiations on the actual agreement. So that goes back to the idea that there still is public input, there still is the agreement phase that will be a piece of this. And that's, like I said, all the comments. Do we actually need to be on their website? Question, do we actually need to be on the website? The lodge is constantly booked throughout peak months. Understand the drop-off season, but numbers are mitigated by the summer. I think the idea there is essentially that marketing-wise, the state can probably do the exact same through the management company with the agreement, continuing the management firm as is current, in addition to other resources that they can put in there also. So those are all of the questions. I will share again our contact information along with, like I shared earlier, encourage you if you have questions for Commissioner J.P. Ducro or Commissioner Catherine Whittington or State Representative Sarah Fowler Arthur or State Senator Sandra O'Brien to reach out to talk. They're happy, as I shared. I know Commissioner Ducro has been constantly answering questions and helping to educate the public as well over this past week or so. So, we're never hesitant to talk and to answer questions. Anything else that you'd like to share out, Commissioner Kozlowski?
No, but I would encourage those that perhaps have other questions, comments, or even concerns, reach out to me, reach out to any of the commissioners. I don't want to speak for the other two, but I'm sure they would welcome, the calls as well. But please reach out to us, reach out to me, contact information there. I am always able and willing to have a conversation. So please reach out. I believe many of you know, and many of those that have posed questions here know that I have an open door policy. And don't hesitate to reach out anytime. Would always be happy to chat about this or any number of other things going on here in Ashtabula County.
This recording will be up on the Auditor website along with, it's been shared on Facebook Live. So it lives now on social media, so you can share it with friends and family if they've got questions. Certainly a complicated topic to be discussing and to sharing, but hopefully this, hour and a half, we appreciate those who have stuck on and listened and asked questions. So hope you have a wonderful evening and thank you so much for listening today.
Thanks so much.